Hello, I'm Steve, and welcome to the AE Podcast, Vol 4. We have two guests here in our fourth episode, 104. We're going to talk about patient movement system as a whole. We're going to talk about the Army side, and we're going to talk about the Air Force side, where you have a patient with us, and we're going to walk ourselves through that whole process. Our two guests here, we have Max and Justine. And I'll just have Justine go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Justine. I was enlisted in the Army for 14 years. I was a combat medic and a drill sergeant. I transferred to the Air Force a couple years ago and commissioned to be a flight nurse. And I, with the Army, deployed twice to Iraq, and then with the Air Force, once to Qatar. And I'm here to clarify any misunderstandings there may be between the Army and Air Force worlds.
All right, Max.
My name is Max. I joined the Army in 2010. I deployed to Afghanistan in 2012. I left in 2016. I was injured during my first deployment in 2012 to Afghanistan. And that's what's brought me here today is my experience going through the casualty transportation system. I was a medic for the entire time I was there, 6 years, so it's going to be interesting to see that I saw the medicine as it was happening, and even though I wasn't part of it, to see it in motion was a little eye-opening for what comes after.
That's interesting. Why don't you just jump right in and get us started and tell us about your deployment. What was the mission and what was the environment like?
Okay, so because of the incident, I have some memory issues, so I'm trying to remember as much of it as I could. So we went to Afghanistan. Now, we were an armored unit, but we didn't act like one when we got there. They split us up into much smaller groups, usually 1-2 squads. So it wasn't even like we were a full platoon. And then they would split us up and put us with half of a special forces team, so that way we could cover a larger area. They had us just placed at all these small locations.
What types of missions did you do?
So I wasn't there very long. I was injured pretty early on in the deployment, so I didn't really experience a lot of the missions after I got there.
Could you go ahead and describe your journey from your point of injury to going through the air medical evacuation system?
Yeah, so I was involved in a vehicle rollover, no enemy action, no blast, nothing quite so extreme. I was the driver of the vehicle. The vehicle did roll over on a paved surface, which there's not really a lot of paved surfaces in Afghanistan. But I remember rolling 2 or 3 times, and then when we came to a stop, our TC, the door was ripped off, and he ended up being... He was technically ejected from the vehicle, but because the vehicle rolled after the door had come off, this is my best approximation, he was dumped onto the ground, and the vehicle rolled away from him. Otherwise, he probably would have been killed if he had just been ejected straight from the vehicle. He ended up having his back broken in 2 places, which was the big reason why he was medevaced along with us. When the vehicle came to a stop, at the time, I hadn't realized I had lost consciousness, but I was the last person to get out of the vehicle, and almost everyone except one person was already out. So backtracking from there, that meant the rest of the convoy had to come to a stop, pull security, come to us, and remove people. So at the time, I hadn't realized I had lost consciousness.
What did it feel like? So like you're driving along, what did it feel like in the vehicle when it was rolling over? What were your thoughts?
So when it first started to roll, we were like fishtailing, and I didn't realize that we were about to roll over until, like, in the MAT-Vs, it's ballistic glass, but it's not one solid windshield. It's 2 separate windows. I remember very distinctly being able to see out one to drive, and then being able to see out both of them at the same time, which wasn't. I'm like, oh, this shouldn't be happening. This isn't right. And as we were rolling over, I remember thinking, remember your training. You're supposed to shout, roll over, roll over, roll over. And I had this whole conversation in my head. It was, this really just doesn't seem to match the intensity of the situation that's happening. It seems kind of superfluous right now. And I'm like, no, remember your training. You're supposed to say it. By that point, the TC was like, Doc, you son of... And I was like, oh, they already know. So then we just continued to fly around.
Did you want to say it afterwards then?
Well, no,
It
but
sounds like you wanted to say it.
I really did.
You
but,
can do it now if you want.
Oh, no, it just seems a little late.
Okay, go ahead.
So he was, again, I didn't realize it at the time because I thought he had been removed from the vehicle, but he had been ejected or dumped out of the vehicle as best as I can guess. And then our gunner and our dismount, he did do the whole training thing where he pulled him down from the turret and held on to him.
Was that particular vehicle, is it one where the gunner is actually outside?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So for context, I have not experienced rollovers, but there's been some in my unit. Usually the gunner is actually decapitated during a rollover.
Mm-hmm.
So part of rollover training is the people inside the vehicle are supposed to grab the gunner, pull him down. That way he's not ejected. And the TC is usually the NCO in the vehicle they basically are like in charge of everything happening inside of the vehicle. So they would sit in the front passenger seat.
Mm-hmm.
Just so you know what these people are doing in the
Yeah,
vehicle. But good
absolutely.
on him.
Yeah.
Saved that guy's life.
Yeah, he definitely did. So when we finished rolling over, I came back to consciousness. I remember sitting on the roof because we were flipped over on our side and I was kind of twisted in this position. It's like everything in the vehicle had like slumped down into the corner, which is why I was on the bottom of the pile. I ended up disentangling myself. I remember they were trying to grab he wasn't the gunner, but our dismount, because there's only 4 people in the vehicle, but they were trying to pull the dismount out. And I remember his canteen pouch or something on his waist was caught on the lip of the vehicle, and they were trying to rip him out of the vehicle, and he was caught. So all I just see is his limp body just flopping around back and forth. I'm like, oh, this can't be good. So I remember turning around. It's like, oh yeah, you're a medic. Looking down, and there was my bag. My medical bag was just sitting right there at the top. So I reached down and grabbed that. And then I looked over. It was like, oh, there's a rifle. I'm supposed to have one of these. So I just grabbed that one too, and just followed the line of the people down the road there.
So at what point did you become the patient and someone started taking care of you? Was there a medevac, like a dust off, or?
Yeah. So I remember they had the other 3 occupants of the vehicle were lined up on the side of the road there. Our commander, staff sergeant, not commander, but the truck.
The convoy commander is an NCO.
The truck commander, sorry.
Yep.
Yes.
Our staff sergeant at the time, he was trying to, his training had kicked in too. He had his thumb up in the air. He was asking, is everyone green on ammo? Do you guys all have water?
This is the man with the broken back
Yes.
taking
Interesting.
action.
Yeah.
Yep.
Max, also hurt, not realizing it at the time. Also now stepping into the role of medic.
Yep. We just did what we were supposed to do. All right. So they're all laying there. I remember him asking me, Doc, are you good? And when he looked at me, he was missing 3 or 4 of his top teeth there. My first thought was, oh, he is going to be pissed. But I remember the Special Forces medic was there. He was working on one of the other patients, or one of the other victims of the accident, casualty. There we go. That's why we use those words. And I remember him pointing over. I don't remember if he told me to do it or if I just started doing it, but I went to, he was the gunner. I went over and I checked him. I'm like, well, he's yelling and asking for people if they're okay. So he's okay. And the other casualty is being treated. And the other one's sitting up looking confused. So I'm like, all right, this guy is laying flat on the ground. I'm going to go check him out. I ran over there to check him, and he was yelling and screaming about his arm. Now, the gunner, when we slammed or we swerved, he had put his hands out to stop himself. And when he did, he had received enough force on the palm of his hand to dislocate his elbow and had pushed out through his skin. But I remember taking his arm and him yelling. I was like, well, first thing, stop the bleeding. And I kept doing a blood sweep, trying to check to see where all the blood was coming from because there was blood everywhere. I was like, what the heck is going on? But he's just yelling about his arm, so I'm doing a blood sweep. He's screaming every time I touched his arm, as he should be. And I was just like, I don't understand what is going on. And that's when I saw a huge puddle of blood in the road, and I pointed at it, and I said, who does this belong to? Because I was so confused. And when I pointed, that's when I saw the blood pour out the end of my glove like water. I was like, oh, it's me.
Oh, wow.
So every time I was doing a blood sweep, trying to check this guy for injury, I was bleeding all over this poor guy. I was doing my medic thing. I just thought I was doing what I was supposed to do. And then they called in a helicopter. Helicopter came, landed. The Special Forces medic was there, and he took charge of everything. Everyone's loaded on. They're all ready to go. I got my bag. I got this rifle. That's why I looked over at it, and it had a grenade launcher on it. I'm like, oh, this is not mine. This does not belong to me. But that's when he yelled at me to get on the helicopter. I'm like, what do you mean? I'm fine. Forgetting that I had just, watched that I had been injured myself. I thought, like, well, okay, this happened, but the mission is still going to continue. That's when he yelled at me very, very meanly that I had to get on this helicopter and that I was going to be leaving.
That's an interesting point, because I think you said something about that you didn't know you had a head injury. You didn't know that you lost consciousness. And so you were just kind of in your training mode and just going through the process and trying to take care of things, not realizing you were one of the patients.
That's right.
Until you got on the helicopter.
Right.
So what was your next stop after the helicopter?
All right, so we got on the helicopter, and because I was the only ambulatory one, I was the only one that extracted myself from the vehicle. Everyone else had either been ejected from the vehicle or had been pulled out of the vehicle, as best as I can tell. So everyone was on litters. I was the only one that was ambulatory. Everybody was on a litter. So they had them all laid across the helicopter, and they had me in one of the seats there. So I just sat in the seat, just not quite sure what to do. But I had heard of flight medics. I had seen flight medics, but I had never seen them in action. But also being a medic, it was interesting to see my job happen on the helicopter. And it was really interesting to see.
Your first time being off the clock.
Yeah.
When there's stuff going on.
But I remember watching the dismount. I don't know if he had like completely lost consciousness at this point, but like I remember someone was trying to put a C collar on him, right? And it was upside down. So I'm watching
Rookie
this,
mistake.
Right. He was probably panicked too. This might have been his first patient. Who knows? But I remember the helicopter were in motion. I don't want to like fall out of this thing. I don't know. So I remember standing up and like trying to tap the flight medic on the shoulder. I'm like, that guy over there, because it was upside down, he had sat up off his litter all of a sudden and grabbed it, and he was violently trying to shake this thing off of him.
Where did you land?
Yeah, so we flew in the helicopter. It felt like a pretty short trip, at least, to, I think it was Bagram.
It's okay if you don't remember. That's all part of the patient narrative.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Bagram. I remember the helicopter coming down, and I'm still ambulatory. I still got one hand. I'm doing my job. I remember the helicopter came, and they came with those wild wheel
rickshaws.
Yeah, they're just two wheels. They look super unstable. I don't know if I would want to be on one of those. But I remember
You're getting on one.
Right? So the helicopter landed, and I just got off the helicopter, and then they went to grab the litter. I'm like, hey, I've played this game before. So I went and I grabbed the litter, and I helped them load them all onto the rickshaws. And they all wheeled them across the tarmac over to the hospital there. Now, this was the funny part. So they all rush them into the door. All the medical personnel are there. They all run into the building. But I don't know what to do. This is not my area. So I just stood there outside. And this guy came outside to smoke. And he looked at me like he leaned up against the wall. He saw me there, but like he didn't think about it. And he started smoking, and then he stopped and slowed and turned and looked at me. He's like, who the hell are you? I'm like, I'm patient number 4. And he's like, holy shit. That's where, oh my God.
Yep.
And the very first thing he did, now, disarm. That's probably the first thing they teach them to do. That's one of the things they taught us to do as medics. The first thing he did is he came to me and he just put both hands out and put them on that rifle. It wasn't my rifle, but it was somebody's rifle. And I was just really determined at that moment. I was like, no, this is mine. Because if I lose it, I'm going to get in trouble.
Yeah, you soldiers really are interested in always holding onto a weapon. Didn't matter who it was, because you obviously had someone's weapon, but you needed to maintain possession of it.
Right, because we don't know what to do with our hands otherwise. We're just, why did I grow these? But so he realized who it was, and he's like, hey, it's going to be okay. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right, I am a patient. So I handed him the things, my sidearm and the rifle, and then they walked me in. Now they walked me in, the TC, that's the guy with the broken back, he's a marathon runner, so he has very expensive, very nice underwear. And I can hear him from 3 medical bays over.
Wait, how did you know?
I have seen.
Okay, moving on.
Yeah. Well, this is how I found out, as he is raising holy hell because they're going to cut all of his clothes off.
Oh, okay. Yep.
he does not care. He's like, he is giving them the business.
These
He
are my
is-
Gucci shorts.
Yeah, he's like, these are the nice ones.
Yep.
No chafe.
These are my mission undies.
So all I hear is a staff sergeant over there giving this poor nurse the business about how they are not going to cut his underwear off. He is mad about it. So I said, Sergeant, it's okay. Doc, is that you? Tell them not to take my underwear. He's like, I'm not going to come over there and defend your shorts, man.
Yeah, we're gonna in the big scheme of things, we're gonna let those go. We'll get you new ones. No, we won't. But.
So that's when they sat me down. There was I remember there just being a whole lot of people there, but I knew they were there to help, but I also knew that sit still, follow instructions. They know what they're doing. You are not part of this process. You are the process. Just sit still. I remember them coming over with a needle on the left side. I'm like, I know what gauge that is. What gauge is that? Because that looks big. That looks like it's going to hurt. I'm like,
We like to call it large.
Large bore.
So they stuck me and they gave me, I can't remember what it was, some medication, but I remember thinking, it's like, hey, isn't that going to make me? And then the lady's like, yeah, here you go. And she handed me a bucket and I immediately threw up right there.
Interesting.
Now the sergeant major, all the bigwigs suddenly came down because they're all, did you call their families already? Has everyone been notified? I'm just like, can you just leave? They came down there asking me all kinds of questions, and I was trying to, be respectful, of course, and answer their questions, but it was hard to do. I'm just, private specialist at the time. Yes, Sergeant Major. I'm just throwing up all over the place.
So how long were you? So we're going to move forward a little bit. So how long were you in the Army system until you were air evac'd by the Air Force?
Right. So I have some of the medevac paperwork with me today, but a lot of it says the 24th, and because they put me under, I had to have reconstructive surgery on my hand because of the injury that I had sustained there. So I don't really think that we stayed overnight, but I was kind of out of it. I don't really remember a lot of that, but I remember from there, they repaired my hand. I woke up from that. I was in recovery. I remember it's kind of in and out, but I remember from there, they then put us on a large airplane, I assume was a C-130.
Okay.
And then they flew us out of Bagram probably the same day. I want to say a lot of the paperwork says the 24th, but it may have been the 23rd, and then the paperwork kind of caught up with us by the 24th.
Yeah, I looked ahead. I have your $38.99 right here. Thanks for bringing that.
Absolutely.
Kind of geeked out on that. You were at Kandahar. Was your first stop.
Kandahar. Okay. So
so you took that C-130. So you probably, so that was roll 2 at Kandahar. And then you went to Bagram, which was a roll 3, right?
Okay.
It's the Craig.
that makes more sense.
So that was probably within the first day. They probably did some more stuff there because they were probably medicating you, putting you under.
Right. Yeah.
And then next thing you know, you were on a C-17. So the real big, nice, bright aircraft to Germany, right?
All right. To hear, even though I tried to read this, I didn't really understand. Having it read to me helps me remember a lot of that. So I remember leaving Kandahar. I remember leaving Kandahar and then going to another place, but I thought that other place was like some in-between country, like I can't remember any of the other small countries between there and Germany. But it was Bagram that we had ended up going to. So we flew from Kandahar to Bagram. Now, while we were at Bagram, I was in like this tent outside the main hospital, and there was a couple Air Force people there. I remember.
You didn't even make it to the main hospital?
I could
How
walk
dare they?
into the main hospital.
Tell me your experiences in the AE system. What was it like being a patient as a medic and being cared for? Was there anything that stuck out of your care and your time in the AE system?
Right. So the biggest thing was the injury to my hand. I think was the main thing I was being evacuated for because I was no longer capable of performing the mission with my hand messed up. So I wasn't in the hospital proper, but I was kind of in this adjoining building probably because my injury was not as severe to be in the hospital. Now, because of that, though, I felt like I had a lot more freedom than I probably should have had. And this is one of the things that really stood out to me, is that once they kind of sat me down, they said, pick a bed. And then they just kind of put my bag there. And I was, okay. And then they just kind of left. And like, there's no guard. There's no one watching me. I'm just sitting in this tent alone. Now, as a medic, I know this is the process. Don't move. But at the same time, I realized like I could just walk off and nobody would even know.
So looking back at your chart, as you're saying this, you are a 5 alpha. So you were an outpatient.
Oh, man.
So, here's a guy that just had surgery, head injury.
Also
that
on
they
drugs.
Also on drugs. Don't know where you are, don't know what's going on, don't know what your role is. Good luck. You're not even in the hospital. Because you said that, and I was like, something's not right there.
Right.
Probably
Okay.
herps.
Yeah, it could have been in the ERPs, and they're just like, you're an outpatient. You're free to do what you want in the confines of what we're not going to really tell you, and you don't really know. So
There were no boundaries
yeah,
explained.
that's really interesting.
Right. So I'm like, well, I don't know what to do. And I'm just kind of bored sitting here. And I'm like, wait, these are my guys. These are the guys I trained with. I deployed with. Where are they? I don't know where they are. I need to go find them.
Were you with them on the airplane and you just got separated at the hospital? Like, at what point did you stop being together?
No, we were together the whole way.
Oh, okay. That's what I was wondering.
So I'm having a hard time separating the two flights. But I remember being on the one and being told, hey, the ramp is slippery. I'm like, I'm looking at all this like adhesive type material, and I'm like, how slippery could it be? But as it turns out, it can be very slippery. I remember being told so many times, the ramp is slippery. I'm like, the job is to move up and down the ramp. How could it be slippery?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
A lot of people hurt themselves on the ramp.
Okay, so go back to, you were at the ERPs, kind of abandoned, and then
Right.
what happened?
So there's just like this one person at a desk that's just kind of like minding their own business. I was like, they look busy, so I didn't want to bother them. And I remember just walking out the front of the tent and looking to my right, and there should be being this flat like tarmac or a wasteland. I don't know, it's just flat emptiness off into the horizon. I'm like, no, I don't want to go that way. I looked to my left, I'm like, oh, there's a building. And it looked like a hospital. So I walked in there. And I remember walking in, and people were looking at me like they weren't sure what to do, but no one stopped me. So I remember just like kind of walking up to somebody and like, hey, I'm looking for someone that was just injured. And they're like, he's over there. Okay, so I walk over there. As it turns out, it is our staff sergeant who's there, and he's in this like big like waterbed gel type thing.
Wow.
I'd never seen this before. I thought it was the coolest thing. I guess
Wait. Army guys and waterbeds in a combat zone. You said Air Force was bad?
Yeah, right.
Go on.
I guess it's some kind of moldable back splint. So you kind of like you're
Okay, that checks out.
you're supported and but you're not just like hanging from wires and stuff. I remember walking in there. He's like, "Oh, hey doc," he's like, "Hey." We talked for a couple of minutes. He goes, "Hey doc, check this out." And he holds up a button. I thought it was a call button. It was not. And he pushes it and he goes, "I'm going to sleep." And I remember standing there looking at him like, I'm not supposed to leave him. I don't know what to do. So I remember just standing there like, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm just going to stand here. And I did, as he just slipped into his stupor. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's fine.
Some of them figure out how to unlock them
Oh, no.
and play around more with them. So, because they're fun.
I don't remember how I ended up back in the tent outside, but I think it was time to eat. Someone had come to collect me, or they came in to check on him. They're like, who are you? Again, it's like the second time I've been asked that. I could have just walked off again. There seemed to be a real lack of positive control of people, and that really surprised me. But again, being medically evacuated, you imagine if you're being medically evacuated, you'd be a lot easier to keep control of because you're not going to just wander off. You're incapable.
Mm-hmm.
But not in my case specifically.
So at some point, you found yourself back on another aircraft going to Germany, and then from your paperwork, looks like you continued on from Andrews. Tell us about that part of the process of being on the plane for the long flights. Is there anything that sticks out? Is there anything that you felt like you needed that we could have provided?
Yeah, so this is probably the thing that I've been thinking about the most about the whole process. This is the part that I remember the most. I was probably the most clear-headed at that point. I don't know if it's because the medication had worn off from the surgery or because I had finally slept at that point. I think we slept there, and then we flew out the next morning, I think. I remember they loaded us all on the plane. I was supposed to be on a litter, but I remember them talking about slipping on the ramp, and I was just so sure that I don't want to be on a litter carried by somebody up this slippery ramp. So they carried the litter, or I carried my litter, I can't really remember, up onto the plane. Being a medic, it's your point of injury care, and then they just take them away from you, and you may never see them again. And you never really think about what happens after. So after going through this process and now getting on the airplane, you're going to launch stool. Okay, great. But I didn't know like these whole teams of people existed, your jobs. We got onto the airplane. I'm like, holy crap, there's a doctor, there's a surgeon, there's an anesthesiologist, there's like 3 nurses per team, per patient. And I remember thinking, being a medic at the time and always being understaffed and undersupplied, looking at the incredible resources and the training and the people that were on this flight. I'm like, these people are worth more than this airplane is.
Sometimes we have one of those big teams, so an AE crew and a critical care team, and we may have a burn team and a lung team, all for one patient.
Yeah.
And we will fly and get them wherever they are and then bring them all the way back to BAMC.
Yep.
So you hit the nail on the head.
So
everyone matters.
Yep. I remember lay down on the litter, and then you can stand up after we're in the air. Okay, cool. And they came to like strap me into my litter, and I was like, no, I can work these straps. I've played this game before. I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's great. So they just walked over and they sat on the chairs that are on the side of the airplane there. And then we took off. And I remember being in the air, asked, hey, are you okay? And I didn't realize at the time it's because our bodies are going to change in elevation, what you may react differently. As a medic, you've been told things like, hey, if you're going to fly in a helicopter, fill your bulb with saline instead of air. So that way the density and air pressure, you don't lose a seal on an airway or something like that. Mm-hmm. But I never really considered the intensity, the level of care that is going to be required for the change just in elevation. That was something to see. And to know that's what was happening at the time was really eye-opening.
Just like being on the plane, like how did you feel like they took enough care of you? Do you wish they had checked on you more, checked on you less? Did they wake you up when you didn't want it? Like what does it feel like to be the patient?
So I kind of felt almost kind of like an out-of-body experience, because I don't think I received less care than I needed. I think I received the adequate care that I required, because again, I had this hand injury and at the time an unknown TBI. But at the time, I felt like I'd received the appropriate amount of care. And as far as the TBI went, I mean, what are you going to do about it?
Were there points at which you were, because I have heard stories and now have met patients who don't actually know they're going other places first. Who informs you where you're going and how you're getting there? And did you feel like you had enough information about that? Or were you just kind of blindly trusting the system that they would take you where you needed to go?
Oh, I was definitely blindly trusting the system at that point. Because I remember just
because we're taught to do that, right?
Right. It's like, well, also being a medic, I knew what was happening in theory, but I had never actually seen it in person. So I'm like, this is happening. So just follow all commands from the tower. Don't deviate. Just do as you're told.
Do you think it was different for your battle buddies and your NCO? Like, do you think that even though you basically went through the same process, do you think their experience was different because they weren't medical?
Absolutely. So the person I remember the most is our staff sergeant, our NCO. He was, remember we were on the right side of the airplane and he was more towards the end. And they still had him in that crazy back cradle waterbed thing. It was amazing. I was very fascinated by that piece of equipment. I was like, wow, this is so cool. But I remember going back there, and I remember, like, for me, from my level of care, I think I had, like, one person that I was talking to, but I'm sure that there were more people that were part of my team, but I didn't require that much care. But I don't know if they were there or weren't. But I remember feeling like you're supposed to be with your people. Where are your people? Be with your people. So I went down there, and our staff sergeant was there, and he was, he was unconscious. He was just completely knocked out at that point. And I remember his, it was like, I want to say 4. I don't know. I couldn't tell you their faces. I couldn't tell you how they were dressed. I just remember their being there. I remember talking to the gentleman on the end, and there was another lady sitting next to him. And even though he definitely was in charge, she seemed very knowledgeable. And they were, I told them, I was like, hey, I'm his medic. I was in the incident with him. What is going on with him? And they, HIPAA, patient confidentiality, that kind of thing. But they told me just enough to put me at ease. And they didn't put me back in bed. Now, the right thing to do was probably to keep me from wandering around the aircraft mid-flight, but they did give me a little bit of freedom. But what I did was I stood there and I found something to lean up against. I think it was like this T-type structure where they loaded the litters onto it. Mm-hmm. I remember leaning up against that and just kind of standing there with him and feeling extremely guilty about the whole situation, because even to this day, I'm not quite sure what caused the rollover, but I still carried a lot of guilt with that I had caused this injury, but I knew that I couldn't leave him, that I owed that to him in some way. So I remember standing there with him for a while. And then I think it was one of my care providers had come to me and was like, hey, what's going on? Do you need anything? Do you need anything to eat? There's a bathroom. It was like this modular unit, it's this big box that locked into the airplane. It was like a whole bathroom thing. I thought that was really interesting. I used that. I got a coin from the Special Forces Command, guy there who's in charge of the area. And I had it in my pocket. And when I went to go pull my pants up, it fell out of my pocket into the toilet. It hit the lever.
Classic.
It hit the lever and I washed it. I was like, I wonder if I could get that
I would have gotten it for you.
I thought about it, but I was like, no, they are doing their jobs. And I was like,
I would have.
I was like, but what if they suck it out with a vacuum? How do they dispose of the waste? Do they suck it out with a vacuum? Do they just dump it? My concern was that it was going to destroy their equipment. Oh. That was my biggest concern. At that point, I was ready to just let stuff go. Anyway, so this care provider had come and asked, hey, do you need anything? I don't think we were actually close to landing, but he knew that I wasn't going to leave our staff sergeant. So he's like, hey, you're a medic, right? He totally played on my knowledge base. I didn't realize I was being played at the time. He's like, what about, what he said? He wanted to give me a Percocet and something else. And I was like,
Phenergan.
I think it was Phenergan. I was like, I'm resistant to opiate-based drugs. They don't do as much for me as they would for somebody else. He's like, all right, so I'll give it to you with Benadryl. I'll tell you what, they have a synergistic effect. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense.
Also makes you go sleepy.
That's exactly what happened. I do not remember anything else other than, hey, you need to get off the plane now. Oh, okay. I had the straps on me and everything. I was like, when did these get here? I don't remember this. So I do think that as you had asked, my NCO there, was his experience different? Probably very much so. Yeah. But I think the most positive experience that anybody could have in this whole situation is to be sedated.
Yeah.
He definitely seemed to be having the best time of it.
I have joked for a very long time that the best way to travel is unconscious. In the interest of better charting, Max used his documentation from his flight. He actually brought it to the VA and it was part of his VA claim. So don't think, I know I have heard a lot of rumors because we don't actually know what happens to our charting after the fact. But the fact that he still has it 10 years later and it was part of his VA claim,
I'm holding it right here.
So
this
just
is
know,
one piece out of many charts he has.
Even if you think that what you're writing doesn't matter, just be diligent because it mattered for my brother. So just remember that it could matter for someone else in the future. And
looking at this, you were airvac'd at the end of November in 2012, which the 139th, we were deployed at that time. So there was people in Afghanistan, in Germany, in DC, and elsewhere. So I can almost guarantee that one of these signatures is from somebody from the squadron.
So I have one, if I may, one thing at the end of this. So I had a lot of issues coming back to my unit, and that's completely out of your guys' hands. But I remember when I got to Germany, they gave me, Wounded Warrior Project was there, and they gave me a pair of sweatpants, which were 2 sizes too big, and a hoodie, which was 1 size too small. But it was so important to me because when I got back to my unit, I didn't have a meal card. I didn't have clothes. I didn't have any resources that I normally would have had. I showed up to formation after I got back to my unit in blood-stained uniform with a shirt that was not uniform, without a blouse, and they yelled at me. about being out of uniform. I'm like, there's blood on them. I don't know what you want
Army.
me to do. So the reason I bring this up is, but it would have been so important for me and others who are not as intensively injured, who are going to go right back to their unit, to have a pair of clothes, almost kind of like a care package. You could do something like you flew, Health Airways on it with a smiley face, something funny, and kind of bring the, a little bit of camaraderie together that way.
It brings us full circle of why your buddy didn't want his underwear cut off,
Right.
because he knew.
He knew in advance.
He knew he needed those.
He saw the writing on the wall.
Yeah, he was one of those been there, done that kind of guy. So
Yeah.
he'd probably been evac probably more than once at this point.
Oh boy. So with that, we're gonna wrap up in the interest of time. We appreciate you telling us our story, Max. We appreciate your service. Thank you for your service. It's a very honorable story. We really appreciate it. This is AE Podcast Vol 4, and this is the 104 episode of that. Thank you.
Thank you.